Hello gamers, it's your furry bastard Slayer here. Well, I had a little coin toss as to what my next video would be. Either a beginner's guide to punk rock, or a video on why yours truly doesn't like the N64. Well, looks like I'm doing the latter for now. Let's just say that my opinions on the N64 will spark some debate in the comments. If you didn't know already, the N64 is one of the most fondly remembered retro consoles among the gaming community, with many YouTube game reviewers from the early 2010s onwards declaring it one of the best consoles ever made. Even now, there's quite the tidal wave of nostalgia towards this console and the many legendary games that came with it. To this day, Super Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time are still constantly seen on Best Games of All Time list. So, considering those credentials, how could I possibly not like the N64? Well, that's because Slayercoon's a crazy PS1 fanatic who jerks it to Rule 34 of Crash Bandicoot every day, and owns multiple copies of Final Fantasy VII that he plays religiously every day whenever he's not working his sad, pathetic minimum wage job. Well, actually, that's incorrect. For the most part, at least. You see, I love the PS1 and consider it my second favorite system of all time, but I'm not gonna act like it was perfect. Maybe if I re-review this system one day, I'll go over these flaws, but needless to say, I can see the flaws in any of my favorite systems. The PS2 is my favorite system, but you can't deny that the Xbox was simply more powerful than the PS2 was. I think that the PS3 was the best 7th gen console, but I can't deny that its early years weren't the best. And its early failures helped enable the worst thing about the competing Xbox 360, the paid online aspect that has since made its way into every gaming console that's not called a PC. I know a PC technically isn't a gaming console, but you get my point. So today, I want to go over why I dislike the N64, and consider it the most overrated system of all time. I might as well start off with a little honorable mention, which is the least important reason of the bunch: the fans. You know, for a system that only sold 30 million units and got its ass handed to it by the competing PlayStation, N64 fanatics are quite the loud bunch. Nintendo fans in general are quite loud and were even so during the Halo Field of Duty craziness of the early 2010s. A time when platformers were completely dead, and generic brown and gray FPS trash ruled the land. A time when Nintendo's latest console was being financially outclassed by local lemonade stands and internet fundraisers for kids dying of cancer. Put away the nostalgia goggles and face it, folks, the early 2010s was quite the garbage heap. But I don't think I've seen a console with fans as loud and obnoxious as the N64 were during this period. Even now, they're still rather loud and closed-minded to different opinions. But I am happy to announce that more and more people are waking up and realizing the many faults of the N64, which I might as well get into right now. Number 1. The controller. There are obviously worse controllers out there, but when it comes to mainstream home consoles, the N64's three-handled monstrosity is one of the worst. Yes, the analog stick was revolutionary for the time, but the actual design of the controller itself, absolutely fucking baffling. I can't even imagine what they were thinking with this. Have you ever wondered why there haven't been any three-handled controllers ever since? Yeah, because a few years after this console's debut, the PS1 would show Nintendo how it's done, with 2 analog sticks no less. It kinda makes you wonder why Nintendo didn't just update the controller later in its lifespan. That probably has something to do with the N64's rather tepid sales. In fact, I can't think of any other three-handled controllers aside from the N64 controller. That alone proves why this design is fucking garbage. Don't get me wrong, the controller kinda works when you are using it with the middle prong and the right handle, but it doesn't make the design any better, and whoever greenlit this design deserves to be kicked in the nads. Reminder that I'm not hating this controller because it's the edgy hipster thing to do. I remember seeing this controller in an old gaming magazine back in like 2008 or so. So this was long after the N64's well-deserved death, but right before its undeserved nostalgic revival. Even my little 10-year-old mind looked at this controller and thought, what the actual fuck is this shit? I never liked this controller, and it baffles me that there are people who think that it's good. Number 2. Poorly aged games. Now it's been said that most things age poorly in the end. I can understand that to an extent, But holy ballsack, most games on this system have aged like Elsie the cow's breast milk. There are obvious exceptions like the Zelda titles, Star Fox 64 and Conker's Bad Fur Day, which rose above the adversity and still hold up even now. But most of the measly 400 games on this system are just trash nowadays, and even for their time weren't that great. Mario Kart 64 is fucking ugly, and I doubt it ever looked good. This game's visuals are about as appealing as a McDonald's bathroom after a Happy Meal session gone wrong. GoldenEye holds up like absolute trash, and while I was playing it on an emulator with a PS4 controller, was virtually unplayable. I'm sure a proper 3-armed controller would fix that, but many attest that GoldenEye 64 doesn't hold up at all. I decided to give the N64 version of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 a shot, and while I somewhat managed to get used to the awkward controls on my PS4 controller, I was astounded how badly they fucked up the music. Due to the cartridges, half the playlist of pop punk and nu metal was cut, and by extension, trimmed down and looped to the point of being about as repetitive as most lamestream pop music. Still, I'd take this version of the soundtrack over Louis Capaldi any day of the week. Oh, and I might as well include Perfect Dark in here as well, because it's a game that you can't even play unless you have the N64 expansion pack installed. How pathetic is that? Number 3. The cartridges. By the mid-1990s, pretty much every home console had moved on from cartridges to CDs. Even the 3DO and CDI were using CDs, but Nintendo, they were stuck in the past. They were still using cartridges in their supposedly cutting-edge game console. The main reasons I hear this are to avoid piracy and cut down on load times, but this came at a huge cost. You see, CDs could hold up to as much as 700 megabytes, allowing the likes of Gran Turismo, Metal Gear Solid, and Final Fantasy VII to spread their wings and fly. And so much more. N64 cartridges could only hold 64 megabytes. Unintentional pun aside, this greatly limited the games and what they could do. Voice acting for one had to be cut greatly, with very few N64 games utilizing full voice acting. Star Fox 64 had a good amount of voice acting, but it's so muffled to the point that everyone sounds like they're being suffocated underneath a pillow.
Check your G-diffuser system. I could use some help here, Fox!
Conker's Bad Fur Day is a notable version courtesy of the major talents of Rareware. Because of the full voice acting and other borderline impossible feats for the N64, I'd say that this is the best N64 game. The soundtrack suffered too as well, which resulted in certain N64 OSTs sounding barely any better than most SNES scores, in terms of sound quality at least. Like, if I somehow didn't know any better, I could have been convinced that the OST to Ocarina of Time was from a Super Nintendo game. PS1 games, on the other hand, had fully licensed soundtracks with no compromise. See also the superior version of Tony Hawk 2. And original scores sounded way better, such as Symphony of the Night or the Spyro trilogy. There are some exceptions, such as the almost CD quality metal of F-Zero X, which is one of my favorite scores in all of gaming. But in general, the N64 couldn't pull off the same sound quality as the PlayStation. Full motion video, which was commonplace on the PS1, did not exist on the N64. As a result, games are much less cinematic to say the least. Again, with less capability in the realm of voice acting, Metal Gear Solid would have been completely impossible on the N64. But FMV was something that couldn't be done as well. Even the Sega Saturn and all of its floppiness could pull off FMV and full voice acting. And the small cartridge space in general resulted in smaller games overall. Think about the massive games such as Gran Turismo 2, Legend of Dragoon, Symphony of the Night, and even the first 2 GTA games. These games existed because the CD space of the PS1 let them spread their wings and do things most N64 games could only dream of. And in general, the classics of the PS1 feel more satisfying and fleshed out than even the best N64 classics. Again, the N64 obviously has some classic games that I can't recommend enough, F-Zero X being one of them, But there's a reason you see the same 5 or 6 N64 games being listed as the best games of all time, whereas the PS1 has like a dozen more. I would sooner play Spyro than Mario 64. I would sooner play Gran Turismo 2 than Mario Kart 64. I would sooner play Medal of Honor Underground than I would ever play GoldenEye. But I think I want to end this on a positive note and say that despite all my problems with the N64, I think it was a fairly decent console overall with some fantastic games. Ocarina of Time is considered one of the best games ever for a reason, and if you consider this console your favorite, I'm perfectly fine with that and totally respect your opinion. I'm just speaking out against the N64 zealots who try to act like this system is flawless and get really mad whenever anyone points out their personal issues with the system. The N64 is a console that disappoints me more than frustrates me. If the N64 had a logical controller and used CDs instead of cartridges, it could have very well been one of the best systems ever. But as it stands, the N64 is a good system that failed to be great due to some idiotic design choices. Nonetheless, I hope to get into collecting for this system one day, as prices for N64 games do seem to have dropped in recent years, what with the wave of nostalgia for this system fading. More and more people are coming to terms with this system's flaws, but that shouldn't deter you from enjoying the things you love. I fucking love the first 2 GTA games even though those games actually aren't that good. I'm just willing to admit that some of the things I love have damning flaws, and neither should you. Even though I would consider the N64 versions of THPS 1-3 the inferior way of playing Tony Hawk, I still enjoyed my time with them. If you ignore the lack of FMV and the cut-down soundtrack, they are pretty much the same as the PS1 version. Those unlockable skate videos were something I could do without anyways, and nowadays you can just turn off the soundtrack and go listen to Spotify, or go on YouTube and play the entire soundtrack in its full-blown glory. I originally wanted to be much more harsh on the N64 in this review. I was going to end it with a joke about me destroying the N64 with my ass cheeks, but no, I actually kinda like the N64 in spite of the damning flaws. It's just that I love crapping on the system for the things it gets wrong. Nostalgia really does blind people from admitting the most obvious of problems, and in a perfect world, this controller would be universally reviled.